Hello and welcome to our webinar this evening. This webinar is all about studying in the USA at the undergraduate level, and we are really excited to have you joining us this evening. So my name's Rowena. I'm an Education USA advisor here in the UK. My job, along with my colleague Basha, is to help anyone who wants to study in the United States figure out how to do that, how to go about that, and to give out great advice. I got to study in the US as part of my undergraduate degree. It was easily one of the best things that I've done in my entire life, and it's really exciting to be able to help you through that process as well. I don't know if Basha wants to just briefly introduce herself.
Good evening, my name is Basha. I'm Education USA advisor here as well with Rowena. I actually lived in the US and I went to a community college there for 2 years, and then I finished my degree here in the UK. So yeah, we're glad you are able to join us tonight, and hopefully you'll get a lot of useful information from us.
Fantastic, thank you, Basha. If I could have the next slide. You might be wondering, what is Education USA? How does this all work? So Education USA is a network of official advice for anyone who's interested in studying in the United States, any international students. So we are the Education USA advisors for the UK. We are based in the UK, and our specialism is helping translate UK system into the US, and how you could go about to end up studying in the United States and have similar experiences to the ones that many British students are able to enjoy when they go and study in the US each year. So our advice is for free. You cannot pay us for our advice. We offer free, unbiased advice about studying in the United States, and really enjoy answering questions and helping people along their journey. So we're here to help. I'm going to hand back over to Basha in a second, but just an encouragement, we will be asking for your questions at the end. So if you do have any questions along the way, feel free to use the Q&A box. Feel free to submit your questions there, and we will either type answers to them as we go, or answer them in kind of Q&A format at the end. So I'm handing back over to you, Basha.
Thank you, Rowena. So why study in the US? Great question. Hopefully we'll be able to answer that question for you. The quality and reputation of US universities, there are over 4,500 US universities offering undergraduate degrees. That's compared to about 120 here in the UK. So within that 4,500, there is a huge range of different personality and style of university, and there should be something there for you. We do like to take caution that you pay a little less attention to the rankings of the US universities as possible. And when you're researching, instead of focus on fit. So it's what makes that university interesting to you, and why do you want to go there? Because you might find that there are many high quality universities that you may never have heard of, if you don't look at the rankings as much and look at that fit. You'll get the opportunity to experience campus life and activities. US universities are known for having a very vibrant campus life, and they encourage students to be involved from the start outside of the classroom. So that could be doing anything like joining a music club, a dance club, joining sports, or even something like log rolling, which is a club at Wisconsin University. The universities in the US have what's called liberal arts, and they focus on teaching. So this is a top attraction for UK students, as they follow the idea of a liberal arts curriculum, which basically looks at a well-rounded education. So this allows you to have a flexibility to explore different interests before selecting a major. They also have an emphasis on teaching and a very engaging classroom environment. And you could take a different combination of study topics. So for example, engineering or engineering and art. And students can switch from different topics as well during their studies there. So you could take a class from engineering to global gender studies, a class on feminism. The world is your oyster in US universities. There's also funding opportunities, which might surprise some of you, but this is another top reason to study in the US. So we'll discuss this a little bit later, but there are many opportunities to find a variety of scholarships in the US as compared to the loan-based system here in the UK. It gives you an opportunity to internationalize your CV. So this is appealing to employers as it shows, boldness to do something different. It shows that you have interpersonal skills and that you have cross-cultural communication as well as other skills. It gives you an opportunity to build networks of friends and even professional contacts around the world. And there's many student job opportunities as well. So whilst you're studying there, you can work 20 hours a week during term time and 40 hours a week during holidays, and even up to a year after graduation. You also get the chance to learn about a new culture. So the top reason to learn about the US and its culture is to go there. Sorry, the top reason to go there is to learn about the US and its culture. And the US spans across 6 different time zones. So it has a great diversity in geography and cultures. It also has long summer holidays to give you a chance to explore. And obviously living on campus helps to get to know the US culture and immerse you in it. So what are the key differences between the UK and the US? So typically the programs are longer. So it takes 4 years to finish your bachelor's degree versus the 3 years here in the UK. The admission to the university is as a whole. So you don't apply for a particular department. This reflects the liberal arts system. So you don't have to choose a major until a later date or a later year. You don't have to choose it in your first year of study, as compared to the very course-specific degree here in the UK. There's also less government control, which means the institutions have more diversity and freedom to do what they like. But that also means that there are no set fees for universities and there's no centralized admission process. So the application process is slightly longer. It's more in depth because the admission process is more holistic as a whole. The universities don't just look at your grades, but they look at your whole application and they want to get to know you as a person. Now, the other difference is that you also apply for funding alongside your application to universities. So it's alongside the admission process and not after you're admitted. Now, this is something to keep in mind when you're starting your research, if funding is important to you. And there's also an exception. Law and medicine are studied at the postgraduate level in the US. So you can't study those 2 subjects in the undergrad in the US. You have to do it in the postgraduate level. So what are some terminology differences between the US and the UK? So US high school or years 9 to 12 correspond to UK secondary school. So that's year 10 to 13 in England and Wales, and years 11 through 14 in Northern Ireland, and S3 through S6 in Scotland. College, university, school, institution, they all mean university in the UK. So a college is not less qualified from the university, and it's the most common term used in the US for a university. You will also have various classes or courses, so those are equivalent to the UK modules here in the university. And your degree program or major is the same as a UK course. So it's helpful to know these terms as you research programs in schools so that you know what they're talking about. So what would be the timeline for applying to a US university? So we recommend beginning your research of the universities between 12 to 18 months before enrollment. So that's typically at end of year 12. You would then register for any required admission exams and aim to take these in the summer after year 12. Now, keep in mind that some universities do not require any admission exams. You could find that information on their website. You would then finalize a selection of where you will be applying in early autumn of year 13. So that's between 10 to 12 months before you plan to enroll. Now, we'll go over strategies of how to do this. And about 8 to 10 months, or the autumn of year 13, you would start putting together an application and submit those according to the deadlines. So once again, keep in mind that different universities will have different deadlines for the application process. Now, in the spring of year 13, so around 4 to 7 months before you enroll, you could expect to hear back from the universities you apply to with their admissions decision. Now, based off of where you were accepted, you would notify universities of your decision and apply for your visa. So that's about 1 to 3 months before you enroll. There are resources on our website to help with your pre-departure, so including things like travel advice, living arrangements, campus life, etc. And you would typically start around mid-August to early September. So that's slightly earlier than here in the UK. But that's the timeline that we propose you to follow. So how do you go about choosing a university? This is an important step in the process of applying to a US university. And it's very important to think through this step. And the key is to stay flexible. As I mentioned before, there are over 4,500 universities in the US. So it might sound like a daunting process to narrow down your prospects. But we're going to discuss some strategies that you can implement to help you choose and in the choosing process and help you narrow that number down to a number that is relatively small. So it's important to know the context of the US as you consider applying to the US universities to study there and choosing which institution you'd like to apply to. Now, there is no national set standard for universities. So each university is free to choose their own set of fees, their course structure, the student environment. Unlike the UK, where there are structured fees and many universities have a fairly similar environment for students and the similar feel. Now, that means that there is so much variety amongst the institutions in the US, which is why it appeals to UK students. Now, it might seem daunting, but it's a great thing to know that there are so many universities and so many different types and options that there's bound to be a university that is a good fit for you. Now, we're going to talk about funding a bit later, but I just want to plug this in here because if funding is important to you, then this needs to be considered from step 1 of the choosing process. So you want to only be applying to universities that offer financial aid to international students. And we'll talk about this a bit further on, but note that it's important already in the step of researching the universities. So make sure that if funding is important, that you keep that in mind in this very first step of choosing the university. And just a final note is that you could complete UCAS applications alongside US. So just be mindful of the deadlines as they will be different between different universities. So what is this fit I've been talking about? This is the first step in choosing process. So what we mean by fit is to think about the factors that are important to you in going to university. So what this means is that you would find a school and program that is going to be the best fit for you and your personal and academic interests. Now, there are many factors to consider, both in and out of the classroom. For example, the types of programs and the departments the university has, where are they located, what's the availability of funding, the campus size. Do you want to be in a small university or do you want to be in a big university? what's the academic environment like? Is it rigorous, competitive? How supportive are they of their students? How inclusive is the university? So begin thinking about these factors that are important to you more broadly and prioritize them. What's the most important to you? Is it maybe the environment that you live or the weather? Do you like the cold and snow? Then you might want to think of universities, that have 4 seasons. Or do you want to be somewhere where it's actually nice and warm and a bit different from the UK? You might want to think about the West Coast or somewhere in the South. Are you trying to save money? Living in an urban place will be more expensive than in a rural place. Just like here in the UK, living in London is more expensive than living somewhere up north or even in the south of England. Those are just the different factors that you should consider. We also like to encourage you to think beyond the rankings, but look at the variety of factors. So rankings in the US are not the same as the UK. Some universities don't rate the quality of teaching or graduate prospects, and some give weight to how much money a university has, or they invite other universities to peer rank themselves. So just keep that in mind, that rankings can be a useful tool, but it shouldn't be the only method you use to choose a university. You want to write down those factors that are important, and as you are narrowing down your choices and options, keep those in mind and make sure those universities meet those factors. So now that you decided what factors are important to you, the next step is to use that information to begin researching universities. Now, unlike UCAS, you are not limited to 5 universities. So in theory, you could apply to as many as you like. However, for time and financial reasons, we recommend that you apply to between 6 to 10 universities. Now, to jumpstart your process of choosing, you want to focus narrowing those 4,500 institutions to a list of about 10 to 20 schools that you think could be a good fit for you. Now, how do you go about this? You can find resources on our choosing section of our website in the undergraduate guide. And this includes a list of links to search engines to help with this process of narrowing down those 4,500 to a reasonable number. And we're going to go through an example of one to show what this process looks like. So this is one of the search engines linked on our website called Big Future College Search. And as you could see on here, there's a variety of filters you can use, including the type of school, the size of the school, location by the state, what majors are on offer, the campus life. And this is where you would apply all those factors that you were thinking about in your fit. Now, it's important to note that for funding considerations, so within affordability, you could select different percentage of need met, but make sure you tick the box titled Aid for International Students, as this will bring out universities that offer aid to students in the UK. Now, without any filters, this will show you almost 4,000 universities that are listed. So for an example, we have put in a variety of filters to narrow down our list of schools. So we wanted to attend a 4-year school with less than 9,000 students in Ohio that will meet 100% financial need for international students. So as you could see, this brought the number to 4 universities, which is much more manageable. You could then go into each of the university profile to find more information about the university, such as their application deadline and also the link to their website. So in this case, it's Denison University in Granville, Ohio. You could also see the different details like the size of the institution, the graduation rate, the average financial aid package. And you could click on options to the left to get more information on campus life, majors on offers, the application process, fees, and different information about the university. Now, this is the webpage for international applicants for Denison University. So you could see here that Denison prides itself on offering a cultural diverse environment, and it compromises of 16% international students for their student body. So it has strong academic reputation. On the bottom, it says they have test optional admission. There's no fee to apply for admission, and there's no supplemental essays required. So when you're going through all these universities and you narrow down to between 10 and 20, each university's website will give you information about if they're test optional, if maybe that's something important to you, maybe you're not good at taking exams. If there's extra essays that you have to do, what the application process is for international students. So it's important you do your research as well on the university website. I'm going to hand it over to Rowena now.
Great, thank you so much, Basha. So you started looking around, researching, staying open-minded, thinking about finances, if that's something you need to think about. So you've been pulling together all this research. And I'm going to be honest, if it was me, the kind of person I am, I would probably have like a spreadsheet or a Google Doc just to help me organize the kinds of schools that I'm coming across. Because as I'm doing that process that Basha was talking about, I might be coming across important information, maybe web URLs that I keep track of, names of universities, things like that. So to just keep myself organized, I probably have a spreadsheet or a Word document, something like that, just to keep track of all this information. And so as you're doing this research process, I can't stress enough how important this process is. A lot of students that Basha and I work with want to skip straight to the end, the applying section. And we see students tending to be more selective, especially at highly selective colleges, the more research they've done. So allow yourself plenty of time. It might feel quite nebulous to do this research, but allow yourself that time because it helps you be more successful at the end of this game. So you want to start to think from this kind of wide research, open-minded research that you've been doing. You want to then start to think about narrowing down your options. And you're going to be thinking about the universities that you actually likely might be applying to out of the ones that you've been researching. So your goal is to probably find somewhere around 6 to 10 universities is my suggestion for universities that you would actually be submitting an application to. So I'd have my long list, and then I'd be aiming to look to make a short list. And within those 6 to 10 universities, personally, if you want to go and study in the United States, I would suggest that you're a bit smart about this. You're thinking a bit thoughtfully in the same way that you might be thinking about your UCAS choices for UK universities and thinking about having a range of different universities there to help make sure that you secure at least one offer. So too, do you want to be thinking about the US in the same way? We've talked a little bit so far about some of the universities, and I can tell you that many of the highly selective universities are incredibly selective and incredibly difficult to get into. If that was your entire list, then you may well find that you don't end up with an offer at the end of it. So you want to be thinking about a range of different universities in that 6 to 10 schools. Universities are all going to be a good fit for you and what you want to study and what you're all about, but at the same time offer you a real opportunity to help maximize your chance of getting into a university. So you want to be thinking about how that maps out on what it looks like. And you might be asking me, well, Rowena, where do I find out about these universities? Obviously, you can use the tool that Basha was showing you, Big Future College Search. And then she was showing you the website pages. And honestly, it's not quite like UCAS where there is like central pages of information. Unfortunately, a lot of US university research is about going to each individual university and learning more about that university. And the best source of advice and information about that university will be the university's own web pages. Most of them will have an admissions section, which will have full information, all sorts of information about what it's like to be a student there, about what the majors and minors are at that university. There will be all sorts of information about the kind of vibe of that university, the kinds of things going on campus. you'll be able to find out more information on housing, programs. You'll be able to see things like virtual campus tours. You'll be able to find out student life. You'll be able to see what kind of research is happening at those universities. So really kind of using that website as a resource to really help build your research and kind of really get under the skin of that university. A really good point for me is often when I go on US university websites, I'm often looking for pages aimed at international students, which, unless you're a domestic student in the US, you are an international student. And universities will have developed pages that will be answering common questions from international students, which can be a really useful resource as you're kind of scoping out the university too. You can also check out their university social media channels. Pretty much all of them have an Insta page. They will have TikTok. They will have a YouTube channel. And these can be really great resources to be able to start to unpick what's life really like at this campus. Each university is so different. Unlike in the UK, US universities have really strong personalities. So you want to be kind of getting under the skin, finding the universities that are really hitting the things that you care about, the things that you're interested in. And universities' social media pages can be great to have a look at. You can also have a look at things like the campus newspaper. You may well start to find on the university's social media, you might find students who are at that university who are commenting there. You may be able to go and have a little look at what they're up to. So you can kind of get a different sense of what it might be like to study at that university. And the other thing I'd just say here at this stage is this is where one of those culture differences come between the US and the UK. US universities, and particularly selective universities, really are keen to hear from students who want to go and study there. And you can do that even before you've applied. So unlike UK universities, who can be a bit like, submit your UCAS form and then we'll talk to you, US universities, think of it like building a relationship. In the sense of a bit like a kind of professional relationship. So asking questions to an admissions officer is really not a problem. They're looking to build relationships with prospective students who are keen and interested to study at their university. So don't be afraid. But my top tip here would be, if you're a parent of a student who is looking at US universities, I really encourage your young person to be the person emailing the universities. Sometimes I have universities say to me, oh, but Rowena, I'm not looking to admit the parent, I want to hear from the student. So just a real encouragement to students, be brave, get into that kind of emailing style and really own that space, because it only helps your application. Okay, next slide. So I just wanted to throw in a couple of different universities that you might not have heard of yet. And just to give you a little bit of a heads up on some of these universities out there that might be a really good fit for you. So the first one I want to share with you is Middlebury College. So Middlebury is a small liberal arts college. It's super selective, so really hard to get into, produces outstanding world-leading research on things, everything from languages to environmental science. It's in the middle of Vermont. It's got its own mountain to go skiing on. And it's just an incredible example of a university that is really focused on the undergraduate experience. So a liberal arts college will have undergraduate students, it will have research producing professors, but no graduate students, no what we would call here in the UK postgrads, which means that research opportunities go to the undergrads, and all the classes are being taught by top professors. So you've got this kind of very artsy, very kind of cool vibe on campus with these amazing students, students that I've worked with who have gone to schools like Middlebury. It's not been unusual that they've been published on a research paper before they've even finished their undergraduate degree, just because of the opportunities available to them. Next slide, please. Another example of a liberal arts college is Scripps College. So Scripps College is in California, and it is this incredible college that is on the outskirts of the Los Angeles area in a place called Claremont, California. Scripps College is a college for only female identifying people, and it is an incredibly beautiful campus that has all sorts of amazing facilities and research and programs around things like everything from kind of English to art history, museum studies, all sorts of things like that. And it is an incredibly powerful place where women are really put in the center of the academic experience. And like other women's colleges in the US, women tend to come out taking on leadership spots just because their whole academic experience has been like that all the way through. So another college to have a look at. The Scripps College is interesting because it actually shares a campus or shares part of the campus with 4 other colleges who all share kind of share resources. So it's part of a consortium, and it means that Scripps students can actually go and cross-register at these other colleges, and they are Pomona College, Claremont McKenna College, Harvey Mudd College, and Scripps. Yeah, so that's the 4 of them. So just as another example of kind of differences in different universities. Next slide, please. And then maybe you're looking for something a bit different. I just wanted to put out there Vanderbilt University, which again is another incredibly selective university, but maybe is one you haven't heard of yet. Vanderbilt is in Nashville, Tennessee, which is the home of music in the USA, and particularly country music. You've got this incredibly urban space. So you've got a much larger university than Scripps or Middlebury, where you have a much larger campus, and you've got this opportunity to kind of take advantage of the city, to immerse yourself in what is a beautiful campus, but there's much bigger kind of city around you, research hospitals, all sorts of facilities. Unlike the previous 2 colleges though, Vanderbilt is a larger research university. So you're going to have postgraduate students, what the US calls graduate students, wandering around too, and it changes the vibe on campus. So if you're looking for kind of work hard and play hard kind of place, then maybe Vanderbilt might be a good fit for you. Next slide. Okay, at this point, and I know it's even we've even talked about it a little bit already this evening, this idea of the Ivy League. I just wanted to throw some truths out there about what is the Ivy League, how does it work, etc. So the Ivy League is literally all it is a sports league between 8 universities in New England. So be really careful when using this term. I always think journalists in the UK who talk about US universities throw this term around, and I just think it's really lazy because it tends to show they don't know what they're talking about. The Ivy League is a group of these 8 universities, and it's not the same as the Russell Group here in the UK. There's no joining the Ivy League or leaving the Ivy League, and lots of universities that you might expect to be in the Ivy League actually aren't. So MIT, not in the Ivy League. Stanford, not in the Ivy League. Rice University, not in the Ivy League. Emory University, not in the Ivy League. NYU, not in the Ivy League. You get my picture, right? So make sure that you're being careful with your terminology and not limiting your choices by only focusing on 8 universities. Fun fact, most people in the UK can't even name all of those 8 universities themselves. So all of those universities that are in the Ivy League are all private research institutions. So you're limiting already your opportunities to explore lots of different other types of universities. And what you might find is that some of the universities that I've mentioned, places like Middlebury, Vanderbilt, Scripps, are all kind of as selective as Ivy League schools. We just haven't heard of them as much over here in the UK. And so I'm on a mission to see if we can change that. And it's worth just thinking a little bit about this idea of rankings. Basha's touched on it before, because the way that US universities work at undergraduate level, it is not easy to compare one university to the other because students don't go in. It's not like you can compare all the chemistry students to all the other chemistry students because of this way that the majors and minors work and this kind of idea of the liberal arts system. So it becomes very difficult to compare universities and very subjective to compare universities to universities. But let's say we were talking about rankings. If we were saying the top 1% of universities in the UK, we're talking about 1 to 2 universities. If we're talking about the top 1% in the US, given there's more than 4,000 universities, we're talking about 40 different universities. Most people in the UK cannot name 40 US universities. So just be really careful when you're thinking about this process. And the other thing that I just want to flag is many of the universities that I've talked about, both in the Ivy League, but also the 3 universities I just talked about before, have selection levels, have percentage admissions that are lower than places like Oxford and Cambridge. So again, just thinking about that nature of competition, it's not to put anyone off, it's just to be realistic. Make sure that you're being thoughtful and strategic with your choices so that you can find a university that's going to be a really good fit for you. Okay, right. That all being said, I'm going to move on to a little bit of information now about funding US study. And this is an area that Basha and I get some of the most questions about. So if you've got questions about anything we're talking about tonight, I really encourage you to pop down into the Q&A box. Basha and I will be answering as many of the Q&As as possible, and I might be cameoing into the box to type answers as well later on in the presentation. So please do use that Q&A box if you've got questions. So funding, how do we go about thinking about how to fund your studies? We're going to think in this section a little bit about some of the costs that you might anticipate studying in the United States, how to think about different sources of funding, and then also some strategies to think about how you can be successful in this process of looking for funding. And I think the thing I would say is that for every student in the US, if we can just go back one slide, that's great. The thing I'd just say about funding before we get into any of the detail is to just remember that this is an area of something that even American students have to be thinking about. So this idea of being strategic, the idea of thinking about the funding, putting the money at the center of the decision making, if that's what you need to do, is something that American students have to do as well. And the other thing that I just want to say is the philosophy around how we fund higher education in the United States is different to how we think about it here in the UK. So I'm going to try and give you a whistle-stop tour of some of those things, but if you've got questions, feel free to pop them in the chat box, into the Q&A box. Next slide, please. So what might you be expecting if you were to go and study in the US? So there are a few things that you might want to be thinking about budgeting for right up front. And this is a little bit different to UK. To apply to US universities, many universities will ask for an application fee just for the pleasure of submitting your application. So this is just something to be aware of as you're thinking about it. So these can be as little as like $50, but sometimes up to about $100. That's roughly somewhere between 40 and 80 pounds, depending on the exchange rate. So just worth having a think about, but just be aware that many universities will offer what's called a fee waiver to international students and domestic students who can show that that application fee would cause them, their family, financial hardship. So if you need to use a fee waiver or need to ask for a fee waiver, definitely make sure you're asking for that. Alongside that, you may find that some universities are asking for admissions exams. We're going to talk more about those exams in a bit. I've even answered a question already about them in the chat, in the Q&A box. But if a university does request admissions tests, then you're going to need to take those tests, and there's going to likely to be a cost of taking the test itself. That's around $100 to $200 depending on the options that you select. But then you're also likely to need to prepare for that exam, and you may find that you are buying books and study resources in order to be able to get prepared for that exam. And then there's some other application costs. So before you even start studying, if you are not a US citizen or permanent resident, then you are going to need to get a visa and service, pay your service as part of the visa process. And these allow you to get a student visa, and they do have some costs that go with them. So it's worth being aware of that. Okay, so what beyond that? Tuition and fees. So each university in the US can charge its own tuition fee. There is no set limit like there is here in the UK. And so each university can vary massively. Some universities can even be cheaper than UK universities. Some can be an awful lot more. What's really important to note is not to just think about tuition fees. What you'll find on US university websites is they're talking about something called the cost of attendance. The cost of attendance does not necessarily just equal tuition or tuition fees. Cost of attendance will include tuition fees, but it will also include an estimate of the living costs to attend that university. So you may well see on the website a breakdown of the cost of attendance, which might be quite a scary big number, but it will also have things like tuition fees. It might have room and board, so the room in the dorms and a meal plan. It may have some estimation of what's called personal expenses, think clothing, toiletries, mobile phone, going out money, traveling money, that kind of thing. It may have some kind of estimation of health insurance. It may have some kind of estimation of travel, things like that in it. And so what the university has done is wrapped up all of those different costs into one number, which is the cost per year at the university, and that is the cost of attendance. So if you are comparing to UK universities, you will just want to make sure that if you are going, I don't know, to Imperial or somewhere like that, that you are thinking about what are the costs, not just of tuition to go to Imperial, but also the living costs to go, train tickets, room in halls, meal, food, books, all of those kind of things as well. So make sure you're comparing like for like. Another big thing that is often confusing in the American system is this idea almost of sticker price. So the cost of attendance is the full cost to attend the university. But sometimes you'll find that there are scholarships or need-based financial aid that will actually reduce that cost. So you may well find that universities are quoting statistics about how many students receive something called financial aid, which means that they won't be paying the full cost to attend that university. So it's just worth looking out for that as you go. And the thing about the cost of attendance is, while it may include room and board and other things, you also want to be making sure that you're thinking about the other costs to go to university, any other costs that you may be incurring. So whether that's the cost of flights, so flights to the East Coast might be less than flights to the West Coast, but you also want to be thinking about what kind of lifestyle you might be living on campus, how you've accounted for those things. And you also just want to be thinking about, smartness. Basha was talking about this a bit earlier about funding. It can be an interesting thing when you're thinking about something like, the choice of university that you go to. So if you decide that you want to be in the middle of Manhattan, my suggestion to you is that is going to be quite an expensive place to live. Whereas if you live in somewhere like Michigan, for example, which has one of the lowest costs of living in the United States, or you choose a university that is in the middle of a college town, you may find that you actually need less money as you go. So that's just something to think about as well. Next slide, please. So having said all of that, there is some good news here, and I've kind of alluded to it already. There is funding on offer to international students. So if you would need funding to make studying in the US happen, then there is funding out there. It's just going to require a bit of research. It's going to be requiring to be a bit open-minded, a bit strategic perhaps with your choices and your thought process. And it's going to require a lot of kind of getting into the applications and really working it through. So it is putting that time in, putting the research in early on to make sure that you can be successful in the space. Next slide, please. Okay, so where does funding come from, and how can you think about funding along the way? So basically, there are 4 different places that funding comes from, and US universities consider funding can come from to fund a student go and study in the US. So the first thing, and this is back to that kind of American philosophy on higher education, the first thing that the university will be thinking about is the funding from the student themselves and their family. You may have heard of this idea of college funds in the US, or saving up for college. Very much part of this philosophy that a family does what it can, puts aside what it can throughout the child's life in order to help them get to go and study in higher education. So US universities really do expect families to prioritize students' education and invest in this education process. Okay, so that's one source of family funding. Now, we're obviously perhaps in the UK, and perhaps that's not been your experience. Perhaps you've not got a big old college fund that is sitting there. And so that's okay. There is an awareness that it doesn't work like this in every country, but it's useful to be aware that the university will be expecting you and your family to to put what you can towards your higher education. The area that I see British students being most successful at gaining money to go and study that isn't from personal and family funding, to go and study at a US university, is actually from the US universities themselves. We're going to talk about this a little bit more in more detail, but this is the kind of area of money that I would be pointing to beyond family funding. This is an area that can be incredibly helpful to help British students get there. But there are some tricks and information that we'll talk about in the next slide. So different universities offer different amounts of funding. There's no like set thing that they all have to do. So again, this is why this idea of researching funding is so important to keep that early on. Regularly, I get students calling up. We'll probably get a lot of these calls late March into April, where people will ring me and say, "Hey, Rowena, I want to study in the US." And I'm like, "Great." And they're like, "I need a full scholarship." "Okay, great." And then they'll say, "I am dead set on studying at UCLA." Now, UCLA is a great university. Lots of us have heard of it, but it's not a university that offers any funding to international students. So if that student needs funding to go and study, then UCLA is possibly not a great fit for them. So it's just being really thoughtful about this from the outset so that you don't end up with an offer to a university that then is saying, "Sorry, we don't have any money to offer international students." Okay, we also have other funding available, so external funding bodies. We're going to talk about them in a minute as well. And then the other form of money can be loans. So loans are always tricky. I get a lot of questions about the UK student loan, which works quite differently to American student loans. The UK student loan is amazing. Unfortunately, you can't use it to go and study in the United States unless you're going to go and do a year abroad or something like that. But if you're looking to go and do a full undergraduate degree, the UK student loan unfortunately doesn't go with you to the US. So that's the first thing I would say about loans. Secondly, some universities will offer a loan as part of a financial aid package. It's really important to distinguish between universities that offer a loan through them, essentially you're borrowing money from the university itself. This tends to be relatively small amounts and tends to be on more student-friendly terms, but is always worth looking into and making sure that you understand what it is. Then there are some universities that will say, "Hey, you can go to this private loan provider and take out a student loan there." And that's where I'd be really careful if I was looking at this. I just would say, is there a better university I could be looking at? Is there a university that maybe offers some kind of funding so that I'm not having to put myself in a place where I'm having to take huge loans out? And especially because the student loans in the US work quite differently to how they do here in the UK. I also wouldn't be looking necessarily at bank loans unless you're really keen to do something like that. Again, very different terms and conditions to how UK student loans work. So I'd just be really careful. And again, just be saying, could you be looking at different universities that might offer the funding that you need? And for most students, I would also say there's normally a combination that works. So to get over that funding line, maybe they get a scholarship from a university, maybe they get some small scholarships from external funding bodies, and then maybe they've got family funding as well, and it kind of all comes together to make it possible. That's another area. Okay, next slide. That university funding, one of my favorite areas to talk about. So university funding is incredible in the US, and especially if it's grant money, this is money that is like a gift. You don't have to pay it back. So some students that I've worked with along the way end up with kind of gift money, grant money from the university, and actually end up graduating completely debt-free in comparison to perhaps some of their friends who went to UK universities. So it is possible out there, but it is going to require a little bit of thinking openly, a bit of research, a bit of making sure that you're a really good fit for that university. There are two main types of funding from a university. So the first type of funding is something called need-based financial aid. So the easy way to think about this is money you would need in order to be able to attend. So need-based financial aid, the way it works is the university offers this kind of funding, then they will look at what it costs to attend that university. Then they will look at the resources available to a family. And then they will figure out if there's a gap between those two things. And if they want to admit that student, then they may make up that gap with gift money to that student to enable them to attend. So need-based aid can be different for every single student who is applying through it, because every single family's financial circumstances are different. The university will just be asking that the family puts whatever they can towards the education, and then the university will make up the rest if they want to admit that student, if they offer this kind of money. So really interesting to think about. Some universities that offer need-based financial aid will make up to 100% of the entire cost of studying at a university, and that includes your room and board, and also thinking about things like books, expenses, things like that. Whereas other universities may offer need-based financial aid up to, say, the 50% of the cost of attendance. So even within that, you're going to need to make sure that perhaps you and your family can cover 50%, and then the university will assess need-based financial aid for the remaining 50%. This is why this university research and keeping track of your research is really important. And all the information about this will be found on a university's website. Okay, so you want to also be watching out for something called merit-based scholarships, maybe just called scholarships, on university websites as well. This tends to be more common for international students. So merit-based scholarships, the way to think about this is because you're the best at something. So because of the merit of you. So maybe it's because you have some of the best A-level grades that are applying to that university. Maybe you have a special talent, perhaps musical, or particular service, we call volunteering aspects to your application. Maybe you are an international, some universities will offer an international student scholarship, and bingo, you qualify for that immediately. So there's all sorts of different scholarships out there for all sorts of different reasons, and it's worth having a look through those on university website pages as well. But generally they're going to students who are at the top of the admissions pool for any particular reason. So just worth having a look at those as well. And a subset of merit-based scholarships is sports scholarships. Get asked a lot about this. For top athletes, sports scholarships may be available. If people have got questions about sports scholarships, I'm happy to answer them in the Q&A. But just be aware that when we say top athletes, we tend to be talking about people who are playing sport at county level and above, possibly national level here in the UK, and are being recruited as athletes to a university. So we can talk about that process if anyone needs information. So you'll find information about universities' funding on their website. Make sure you're being proactive, you're finding that information. And often the application process is straightforward. So you'll find on the website, is it just that you need to apply and then they'll consider you for all scholarships? Or is there actually a separate scholarship process you need to go through? Check and make sure. There's often dates by which you need to apply to be considered for a scholarship. So also check that out as you go. But this information is out there, and for me, this is one of the areas that I see being most lucrative for British students applying to US universities. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to give you a quick example here. So Rice University is in Houston, Texas. It is an incredible university, private institution. It has a real, I mean, it's got lots and lots of specialisms, but it's really strong, well known for its STEM programs, and particularly in the space of kind of space and aeronautical engineering and all of that kind of thing. It's very famous because JFK made a speech about America putting a man on the moon. By the end of the decade, in the 1960s, he made that speech at Rice. Rice was, because it's so well known for its space and that kind of sciencey aspect. So Rice. So if you go to the Rice website, here is the cost of attendance for this year. And you can see on here this breakdown of the cost of attendance. So the total cost of attendance to go to Rice is coming out at about $74,000, which is a huge amount of money. And you can see this has been broken down by tuition into room and board. You can see that there are books estimate and this idea of personal expenses. So you can see here a breakdown of all of that, and you can see that they've given you some more information about how it all works. But they are also showing you that many freshmen, that's first-year students, are receiving financial aid, and they have the average responsibility for families receiving aid is actually only $18,000. Now, we need to be a little bit careful here because this includes American students too, where there may be more funding available for domestic students. But it's a really good indicator that there might be something more we can look at, suggest that there's perhaps financial aid available. So if we go over to the next page, we can see here information on the Rice website about some of the merit scholarships available. So this is great. You can see it says merit-based scholarship recipients generally distinguish themselves scholastically and personally, even within our highly competitive pool of admitted students. So that's that bit about being at the top of the admissions pool. And you can see here they've given then some examples of the kinds of students that they have given scholarships to. And so this is not need-based aid. This is because they are the best, merit-based aid, and the kinds of examples. And then they say all admitted freshman applicants are automatically considered for merit-based scholarships. So no separate application form is required or necessary. So that's really great to know. So maybe you're being considered for that. Excellent, great. Next slide. Okay, now we're on a page that is aimed at international students. You can see it written at the top. It says international students. And what's really interesting here is this is a page about need-based financial aid. It says, at Rice University, we believe cost should not be a barrier to attending one of the finest institutions in the country. We admit students from all socioeconomic backgrounds and many students who might not otherwise be able to afford a Rice education. International students, that's all of us, who receive need-based financial aid will have a 100% of demonstrated need met with institutional grant aid, but are not eligible for the Rice investment, which is for domestic students. So this is really great. It's saying that if you literally had £0 to your name and you were admitted to Rice University on the strength of your application, Rice is taking to meet 100% of that demonstrated need. So in that case, if a student had literally zero, then Rice would make up the entire amount, 100% of it, in gift money. So it's kind of like a bit like a sliding scale. So more resources that a family has is really helpful because it shows that it makes it easier for the universities in terms of admitting those students. But don't be fooled. Many, what I would consider here in the UK, middle and higher income families are actually eligible for financial aid. And it's kind of like a bit like a sliding scale. So don't write it off. You can also see then here the application process. So all you have to do is submit something called a CSS profile. This is quite a common form. It's like a financial aid form that you submit alongside the application to the university. So just to give you a flavour of how this works, this is the kind of approach that universities take to this idea of university funding. I think I'm handing over next to Basha, who's going to talk to us a little bit about external funding bodies.
Thank you, Rowena. So yes, as we mentioned, another form of funding for US universities are external funding bodies. Now, what are these? So these just are a wide variety of professional, charitable, or even government organizations that are external to the university. It's something that you could think of as a niche scholarships, as most of external funding bodies have specific criteria based on that funding body's mission. For example, they might be looking to give funding to students from a particular country of origin, or maybe a particular ethnicity. It could be a professional body that's interested in giving a scholarship or funding for a particular field, maybe your gender or interest, maybe a talent that you have. So for example, you might have an organization that is giving scholarships or funding to women who want to be or who want to study engineering at university. So if you are unique in any particular way or really good at something, or you have a different skill, there is likely a funding body with a scholarship out there for you. You just have to find it. An example is Moorhead Kane Foundation. So they offer scholarships for leadership, character, scholarship, and physical vigor. They provide a 4-year, fully funded educational experience for students of the highest caliber at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So this is an external funding body that is giving a scholarship at a particular university. You just have to search and find kind of the niche that you fit in. There are thousands of funding bodies, and there are different search engines that will require time and effort to sift through the scholarships listings and submit separate applications to each body as well. So we encourage students to first apply for that university funding that Rowena just explained, and for all their funding opportunities and their scholarships, as it will be easier and less time consuming. And then if you need to meet that gap, that financial gap still, to look for external funding as well. Now, we do have a link on our website to scholarship search engines where you could once again narrow it down and use filters to find a specific scholarship that might fit criteria that you can meet. So we're going to talk a little bit about a funding strategy that you could use. And there are 3 different approaches to this funding strategies. So as we mentioned a little bit before, you can explore universities in places with a lower cost of living. So it's the same as here in the UK. London will be more expensive than Lancaster. And like Rowena mentioned, New York or California are going to be more expensive than states like Ohio, Georgia, or Michigan. So American universities, what they'll do is, like we showed you, will list their estimated cost of attendance. So that's the tuition fee, the cost of living fees, and personal expenses. So just keep in mind that that is one way to save money and pay a little bit less for US education. And you could scope out places with lower cost of living. So it might be good to actually, if you're keeping a spreadsheet, to list those costs and how much life will be in different places, how much it will cost for you to live in those different, states or even cities, different universities. You could also look for programs with lower tuitions. So different universities, smaller universities might have lower cost. State universities will cost less to attend. However, they might have less funding opportunities available, whereas private universities will cost a bit more, but you might find that they actually have more funding opportunities available. So it's important to take your time when you're researching all your universities, and when you narrow it down from that 4,500, if funding is important to you, it's something that you keep in mind. You might have 6 to 10 universities, and a few of them might be in a city that's a bit more expensive than others, but what funding opportunities do those universities have for you to apply for or to get? So it's very important that you kind of look at that and explore different ways of saving some money and looking at the different costs that are associated with studying there. Now, another strategy is to look at community colleges. So community colleges don't exist here in the UK, but they're a very popular choice in the US as an alternative pathway that could help save a lot of money. So what community colleges are, they are a 2-year college where you get awarded an associate degree. It's not a degree that's offered here in the UK, but it has a professional or vocational focus in the US. And they allow you to follow what's called a 2+2 model, which is basically a transfer pathway. So students start their studies at a community college, and they study there for 2 years. And after 2 years, they then transfer to a 4-year university, and they will finish their 2 years there and receiving a bachelor's degree from that university. Also, many community colleges in the US have transfer agreements. So for example, as you could see on the slide, Los Angeles Valley College is a 2-year community college, but it has a partnership with universities like UCLA, University of Southern California, and Cal Poly. I went to a community college in the US for 2 years. I actually got a basketball scholarship to go there, and I decided that for me that was the right option, as what it meant is that I could stay at home. I didn't have to pay for room and board, but it also meant that I had 2 years of college paid for. So I actually had no expenditure other than, you know, driving to the college. It was paid for me through a scholarship. So I chose to go and do 2 years there. And then I actually ended up finishing my education here in the UK, but I did have an option to transfer to a university and do an additional 2 years. It was really cheap and affordable for me at that time. So community colleges are much less expensive than 4-year universities. You could save thousands by paying a significantly lower tuition fee of a community college for the 2 out of the 4 years. And they also offer smaller class sizes, which could be valuable for the introductory classes as you get more contact with professors. They also require a less rigorous application process and usually less rigorous entry requirements than the 4-year university as well. And students with BTech or OCR or other similar qualifications, they can apply to community colleges as well. And you do not need to submit an admission exam score for admission to a community college. Now, there is more information on our website, including a link to a community college webinar where you could get more information about what they look like and how the process works. And I'm going to hand it over to Rowena.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Basha. So here are our top funding tips. And I know we talked a lot about funding, but it is an area we know lots of people have questions about. So my top funding tips are: start early. Do not be that student calling me in April, you know, saying I've got an offer, but I don't have any funding. What should I do? Because it's normally too late. So start early, put this into your process. My other top tip would be to keep being flexible and be open-minded in the universities you're looking at. You're going to come across loads of universities you've never heard of before, and the first thing you need to do is suspend this idea that if it was any good, I would have heard of it, because most people haven't heard of most US universities, and there are some really good schools out there you've probably not yet heard of. So be flexible, be open-minded, think a bit broadly. I mean, I put this picture here of a goldfish bowl, and you know, lots of UK students end up applying to a university, say like Columbia in the middle of New York City. It's one we've often heard of, and you know, I'm not saying don't apply there, but you will be one of many hundreds of British students also applying. You're just less special, right? Because you will have many other students from the UK there as well. So if you want to be interesting, think about applying to a school like Washington University in St. Louis, top research university. That is incredible, but has very few British students applying to it. Hey, you're going to stand out straight away. So making this jump to make sure that you're standing out, being at the top of the admissions pool is always a good one to have a think about, and to just put aside some of the assumptions that you think you know about the US system, because that's where often the funding can come from. Next slide, please. Okay, so we are into this next section, which is all about completing an application. And this is an area that once you've done that research, just having a little think about it is really important. So I'm going to hand back over to Basha, who is going to be talking about how to complete an application.
Thank you. So what are US universities looking for? The first thing is academics, so your academic achievements, and this is measured by your results, so your GCSEs and A-levels or the equivalent, and admission test scores if required. Now, once again, I'm going to just reiterate this, that not all universities in the US require an admission test score, and you could find information about that on each university's website. You could also check university websites for the average applicant profile. So as Rowena just mentioned, will you stand out, or will you be in a group of the same exact students that are applying to that universities? Or is your application going to stand out and be a little bit different? Also keep in mind that in the US, the academic achievement alone will not guarantee you entrance to a competitive US university. So the application process is much more holistic than here in the UK. Universities look at academic fit. So what are your reasons for pursuing a degree at their institution? How is this going to help towards your goals? So you want to live, for example, if you want to live in New York, but why would you choose NYU over Columbia? So is there a particular program at that university that caught your eye that you're interested in? Or is the campus activity very vibrant? Or is there a club or a society in that particular university that grabs your eye and your attention and you want to join in? Or is the university mission something that you're passionate about, that you want to be a part of? So universities want to know what makes you fit into that university, and why do you want to go there? Now, another thing that universities will look at are extracurriculars, which is a big focus in the US. Now, we're not saying that you have to do everything under the sun, but it's important that you highlight things that you are involved in. So do you volunteer at your school, or maybe at a community center? Do you play sport at a very high level? Did you start a club at your school of something that you were interested in, but you couldn't do, so you decided to start a club for you and fellow students? These are very important things to highlight, as once again, the application is much more holistic than here in the UK. And they're also going to look at your personal attributes. So they look to diversify their campuses and classrooms. The universities, they want to know who you are through the application process. So they're interested in your academic field of choice, your character, your leadership abilities, who you are as a person. Now, what do the application components look like? So unlike the UK, as we mentioned, you apply to each university individually rather than a centralized body like a UCAS here in the UK. And students can apply to as many universities as they'd like. But as we mentioned, it does cost money for every application. And obviously, it's going to take time to put a strong application through. So once again, we suggest that you apply to somewhere between 6 to 10 schools. Now, there is something called the Common Application that around 900 universities use. And this is just a system to help streamline the demographic aspect of the application process. So it's not UCAS in that you will still have to tailor all of your applications to each university. And each university will ask different questions that you have to answer. And you might have some supplementary questions to answer as well for each different individual university. There's also no standard process for the application, for applications, and there's no standard deadlines or requirements. So these will all vary by university, but you could get all that information on each university's website. And just remember that each university will set their own deadlines and application requirements. So when you're doing your research, it might be a good idea to jot down those deadlines and the application requirements that you have to meet. But most applications will follow a similar format. So you might get a chance to reuse or adapt some of the materials that you prepare for each university. And most application components will include an application form with basic demographics, admission test scores, if required. They will also have a transcript, essays, 2 to 3 letters of recommendation, and you'll finally have to pay an application fee of between $50 to $100 per application. So what are the admission tests that I've been talking about? And what role do they play? So in the US, there's no national curriculum at secondary school level, and admission tests are a way to evaluate applicants from different areas in the US and the different schools that they have. Now, once again, it's important that you check if they are required. A lot of universities do not require any admission tests, but some do. And if they do, you would take these in the summer after year 12 or the autumn of year 13 before the half-term holiday. So about 10 to 12 months before enrollment. Now, if universities require admission tests, they would usually be the ACT or the SAT. And as I mentioned, there's an increasing amount of universities going test optional, which means that you can take the admission test and enter your score in the application, but you don't have to. So once again, important that you do double check their website to see if they are test optional or not. Now, how would you choose between the SAT and the ACT? So one exam isn't considered better than the other. It's just kind of what is the best fit for you. And the best way to decide this is to take a full timed practice test of each, the ACT and the SAT. And there are many free ones online that you could take. The difference between them is that the content and style of the SAT and ACT are very similar, but it's how you handle the time pressure and the type of questions that you find most challenging that could help you determine which test is better fit for you. I know when I applied to university, I took both tests, but I preferred one over the other because of the way the questions were formed. So I just preferred one over the other, but we do recommend that you just sit both of them just to see which one you prefer better. The other thing, like I mentioned, are transcripts. So transcript is a list of your academic qualifications and marks covering years 10 to 13 in England and Wales, years 11 through 14 in Northern Ireland, and S3 to S6 in Scotland. Now, a transcript is generated by your school, but you may need to provide your school or a counselor with information about what they need to include in a transcript, or if there's any additional school reports that they need to include in it. Now, if your school doesn't have the capability to print a transcript, there's templates on our website that are available for schools, and they include information such as years attended, GCSE scores, predicted A-levels. Also keep in mind that there is no direct conversion between the UK and US marks. So it's important that your school reports your marks in the British systems. The US universities are very familiar with the British system, and they understand what the results are for your GCSEs and A-levels. So there's no need to convert them into what's called the GPA in the US. And once again, the transcript is submitted online by the school. You might also have to submit a school report, or the school might have to submit a school report. And this just contains information about the school itself for context, just so that universities kind of understand what type of school you went to, what size it was, things like that. And all templates are available on our website for schools to download as well. Now, you will most likely be required to gather between 2 to 3 letters of recommendation. Now, these letters should be a marketing tool for you as an applicant. So this is a chance for your referees to speak about you and your ability to succeed at universities, what your past academic performance were, maybe how you perform in class, any school awards, but it's also about your ability to be able to contribute to the US or the university department and the campus life and the diversity of each university. You know, it's a way for your referee to showcase your leadership abilities and character as well, and your involvement in the school and the community. So it's important that you ask someone who knows you well, both in and out of the classroom. As we mentioned, the application process is very holistic. So universities don't just want to see a reference saying, oh, you know, the student shows up on time and is active in the classroom. But it's more about showcasing your ability to, you know, contribute to your school, your leadership abilities, your character, who you are as a person. And the university may also provide some loose guidelines for selecting referees. For example, they might ask for one letter from a counselor or a teacher, but it's generally your responsibility to choose and liaise with your referees. Now, we suggest that you meet with your referee to discuss the letter, because it's in your best interest for them to write the best letter that they can. So you may wish to schedule a meeting to discuss your reasons for doing an undergraduate degree at a specific university and why you're interested in that particular program and that particular university, you know, what your goals are, what your academic achievements are. Maybe they don't quite know all of your academic achievements in the school or all of your extracurricular involvement in and outside of the school as well. So it's important that you meet and you kind of discuss those aspects of what you do. Now, make sure that the referee is also aware of deadlines and any paperwork that they need to complete. Once again, it is your responsibility to inform them of when the deadlines are and the paperwork that they need to submit. And it's we encourage that you actually tell your referees to avoid being restrained and too modest. So American referees tend to write in an enthusiastic tone. So they use very positive and descriptive language. They discuss the applicant both in and out of the classroom, and they talk about the applicant's personality. And keep in mind that what will be written about your American counterparts, you know, when you're preparing your UK referees to write their letters. So think about how the different cultural understanding and how Americans are, and encourage your referees to refrain from using modest language as well. They should boast about you. So another aspect of the application are the essays. So this is one of the most important part of the application process for the undergraduate study in the US. As strong essays can set you apart from other applicants. And this gives you an opportunity to showcase yourself to a university. So this isn't like your UCAS personal statement. You know, rather than submitting an explanation of your interests and achievements in a particular field of study, as you would through UCAS, you will actually be asked to respond to between 1 and 3 essay questions on the university application. And each university will set its own questions. They'll also set the desired length of your response in the essay. So each essay will be different. Now, the Common App system, there will be 1 essay question that goes to all the universities that use the Common App. And they'll have the supplemental questions, which are unique to each institution. So an example of an essay on the Common App might be something like, reflect on a time when you questioned or challenged a belief or idea. What prompted your thinking? What was the outcome? Or describe a topic, idea, or concept you find so engaging that it makes you lose all track of time. Why does it captivate you? What or who do you turn to when you want to learn more? So it would be very unlikely that you will be able to compose 1 essay that will sufficiently answer questions posed by multiple universities. But there might be some elements of each essay that you could kind of tweak and reuse bits of it for different universities. So just keep that in mind once again when you are applying, that it's going to take some time for you to write these essays and actually make them stand out. Now, some writing tips for these essays is to ensure that you address each question fully. Make sure you use clear and concise language and avoid vague or empty statements or cliches. Remember, if you do reuse any essays, be careful to submit the correct essay to the correct university or program, and double check that all references within the text are to the correct university. The worst thing to do is sending an essay from, for example, Michigan State University to NYU and having Michigan State named in there, because they'll look at it and they'll be like, oh, well, do they really want to go to NYU, or are they just applying to different universities and not actually putting the time and effort to research that? So make sure you proofread and each essay extensively, and even ask others to proofread your essays and give you their feedback. You know, there might be something that you didn't think about when you're writing the essay, and someone that's proofreading it for you, you know, might give you that idea, and you might be able to make the essay even better. The most important writing tip is to be yourself in these essays. So don't give the admission officers the answers you think that they want to hear. You know, give them the truth. What sets you apart? This is a chance to let your personality come through in the essay. It's a way for you to show them what makes you unique, what makes you stand out of that big fishbowl with all the fish in it. There's also more tips on our website and links to example essays on university websites as well. So I would encourage you to check out the other tips and links that we have as well. And I hand it over to Rowena.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Basha. So other things that I just wanted to highlight to you is if you've been sat through this and you're thinking, this sounds cool, but I'm not quite sure that a whole degree in the US is what I'm looking at. I just want to highlight that there are many, many other ways to go and study in the US, to have these experiences, and both may end up being easier to get into and also more cost effective as well. So I just wanted to quickly highlight those before we go into the Q&A. So one more plug for the Q&A box. I have been answering some questions, so do check out the answer questions already, but do pop into the Q&A box and see there some of the questions, and if you've got questions based on what we've been talking about tonight. Okay, next slide. So what could some of these other opportunities look like? So the first thing I want to do is plug UK universities. Crazy, I know, but there are some incredible UK undergraduate programs that give opportunities to go and study in the United States. And this can include university exchange programs where a student either spends a semester or maybe even a full year of their degree from a UK university in the United States, and essentially the university swaps that student for perhaps a student from the US to go and study in the UK. And what is great about these is they can be incredibly cost effective. So you can, you're paying your tuition fee to your UK university, you're accessing student finance to be able to do that. It's a UK student loan, great, great, great. And in the meantime, you then get to go and study out in the US. And perhaps you're only then having to think about the living costs. And you may well even have some of the student loan and bursary payments to be able to help support you doing that. So this can be a really great way to go and study in the US as part of your UK degree. Great things to ask before you apply to a UK university. Have a look at what their study abroad options are like. You may well find that things like particularly American studies often have this year inbuilt, but many, many universities in the UK now offer this opportunity for everything from biology, accounting, business, development studies, maths, whatever it is that you're interested in. Having a little look before you apply to a UK university, and then have a look if there are any courses where they have a year like this built in. So talk a little bit about American studies being an example as well. And then you can also have a look at summer opportunities. So we're calling them summer institutes, summer schools, maybe they might get called. So some US universities will offer summer programs for international students from around the world to come to their campus in the summer and perhaps study a course for maybe like 6 weeks or 8 weeks or something like that, to have that experience in the United States. They tend to be paid for programs, but there is financial aid available, so do have a look around for those. I also want to flag the opportunity to do internships or summer work if you want to kind of get an US experience. Things like Camp America are incredibly popular with British students, and many of whom go out and be camp counselors and so on in the United States. Also looking at possible internships are a great way to look at getting that kind of US experience as part of a UK program. And then you can also look at postgraduate study. So after you've done an undergraduate degree, maybe you might be interested in doing a master's or a PhD. And again, the US can be an incredible space to be able to pick up lots of those programs and be able to go and study kind of after an undergraduate degree, perhaps here in the UK. So there's lots of options out there and lots of information out there. Basher and I also talk to people about postgraduate degrees and studying abroad. So we're super happy to answer questions or give our advice about that as well. Next slide. Okay, so we're just going to quickly whiz through a couple of ways that we can help you moving forward. If something's taken your interest or you want to explore this a bit further, here's how we can help. Next slide. So first things I want to cover off, Sutton Trust US program. It's something that Basher and I and the rest of our team run here at Fulbright. We partner up with social mobility charity, the Sutton Trust, but we do the delivery of the program. So you are literally talking to the folks running it. Sutton Trust US program is an amazing program for Year 12 students if you are in England and Wales, or S5 in Scotland, or Year 13, sorry, in Northern Ireland. And it explores studying in the United States, and then also includes a trip to the United States. And then for those students that want to, we will support them through applying to US universities to get financial aid that they need. It's designed for low-income students, only in Year 12 or equivalent. And so unfortunately, the applications for this year, if you're in Year 12, we've closed those already. But if you are in Year 11 or younger, then please do take a look at this. It may be a really good fit. But if you're not eligible for the program or anything like that, please don't worry, because it's the same folks offering advice here today. So we are super happy to support you. Next slide. And some of the ways that we can support you is if you have a look on our website, we have full guides to applying to US universities, huge amounts of resources. Basher and I spent a lot of time writing content, and it is all free and publicly available. We're not all about paywalls or trying to be like sneaky. We want to make sure that there's great information out there. So if you go onto our website, you'll find whole guides to everything from the Common App to choosing universities and everything in between. To help you there. Next slide. You can also book a one-to-one video appointment. So Basher and I make ourselves available various periodic points. So you can book in a one-to-one 15-minute advising appointment. If you've got specific questions or want to explore a particular topic, you can sign up for those on our website as well. Next slide. We run all sorts of events, including this one, but many other events about studying in the US. And we do those, some of those in person, a lot of them are online, just to make them available to everybody. Next slide. Okay, should I hand over to you for this one, Basher?
Yeah, so every year we also run US College Day. So this is a big event where US universities fly over here to London, and they basically get to meet UK students like yourselves. The people that actually come to this event are admission officers that get to read your applications as well if you apply to those universities. So it's a great opportunity to come and talk to US university admission officers from various universities from all over the US. The fair is completely free to attend. We have over 120 universities and exhibitors attending each year, and you could register for the event in late summer, but on our website we also have a notification list where we will email you when the registration opens, and the event is in September. at the end of September this year. So now we're going to go through the Q&A. So if you have any questions that we haven't answered, please pop those in the Q&A box. And also this recording will be sent around if you need to head off as well. So we will send this out to everyone that signed up for the webinar today. But now we'll go through the Q&A and answer some of your questions.
Yeah, great. Basha, I have a question for you, which is, does your referee need to be a teacher, or can it be someone from a work experience or an extracurricular or something like that?
So no, your referee doesn't need to be your teacher. You will have to submit between 2 to 3 different references of referee letters. And most universities will give you some kind of guideline of who the referees are, but if you're doing some kind of work experience or extracurricular activity, you know, or even playing a coach, it could be one of those people that knows you in that capacity. So whether it's your work experience supervisor, a teacher, you know, if you're doing some volunteering at a community center and it's someone that knows you there well, it could be that person as well. So the referees it can vary.
Totally. I would just jump in to just clarify that 2 of your referees need to be your teachers. So it's not going to work if you've got a sports coach or someone in place of your teachers, just because it's those teachers that need to be in there. As Basha says, there is sometimes an option for an additional reference. My advice would be don't overload it with references, because you want a university to see you, and the people they care most about are going to be your teachers. So that would be my recommendation on that one.
Rowena, I have a question for you. What is the main difference between private institutions and public institutions? Or is it just the class size and tuition fees that are different?
Yeah, good question. So they are very different in some ways, but then so too there are lots of different, even within private institutions, lots of differences between different institutions. The thing to know about state universities and public universities is another word for state universities, is that these are institutions funded by the citizens of that particular state to further the education of those people. So people are paying taxes in order to support those universities. And that is why you'll find state universities tend to have a mission. They tend to be very broad in the education that they offer, a mission to educate their citizens broadly, and tend to offer lower fees generally, but especially to citizens of their state. For everybody else outside of their state, or for international students, they tend to be a little bit higher, but they are lower fees often than the private institutions, which are entirely funded either by research grants, which also fund public institutions, but private institutions are either entirely funded by research grants and or student fee income. So you will tend to see higher tuition fees. It depends on the university. It could be larger classes, it could be smaller classes. Some private universities have 95,000 students, some have 2,000. So it entirely depends, but I guess private universities tend to have a bit more flexibility in what they're doing and what they're about, and expressing that individual university personality. So I guess that would be my difference, but I would really encourage you to go out and research both types of university, because you'll start to see some themes and things going on as well. Okay, so let me just have a little look. Could you place the link for 2023 College Day in the Q&A section? Basha, I might leave that one with you.
Yes.
Amazing. I know that there's been a couple of questions about household income and what level of income is acceptable to qualify for need-based aid. And like I said earlier, it's a really tricky one, because each university will evaluate that slightly differently. So my recommendation to you is to encourage you to connect up with the university, have a look at the funding, what they're saying about funding. We showed you Rice University, for example, which is really clear and upfront. You know, they went right down saying for international students, we want to admit you. If you can't afford anything to come to our university, we will make up 100% of your demonstrated need. And if that's demonstrated need is 100% of the cost, they will cover it. So you want to be looking for the language that universities are using. And then on top of that, I'd be encouraging to be, or kind of thinking about need-based financial aid as like a sliding scale. And I would also say that families we work with are often surprised at the availability of need-based financial aid, even for what we would consider middle and even higher income families here in the UK. Obviously, if you're like billionaires, then you're probably going to be asked to pay the full cost. If you're a billionaire, that's probably not too much of a problem. But just to be aware that that funding is there to make it affordable, and affordable looks different to each family. So there isn't a specific level because each family is different. Each family has different commitments. Each family has different experiences, so and different resources available to them. So I just thought I'd answer a couple of those questions that have come up as well. Great. Okay. How do you know, Basha, whether an ACT or SAT needs to be sat? Can you find that on a university website?
So yes, you could find that information on the university website. Under the admissions, most universities will have like an admission tab, and then it will have first year students or international students admission. Under there, they will have the application requirements. So if they do not require you to take the admission exams, it will clearly state that they are test optional, which means you do not have to take those exams. You can if you'd like to. If you take them and you don't do so well, you don't have to submit those results either if the university is test optional. And I believe on the Big Future search, there might be an option to filter it for test optional universities as well. Correct me if I'm wrong, Rowena. That is an option. Yeah, so you could literally filter it by test optional universities and see which ones do not require those admission exams.
Great stuff. I've also I know I've answered this for somebody. I'm just trying to see if I can find my link. I'm going to pop this link in the chat box. There are people who keep lists of universities that are test optional. I do not require the exam. So I'm just going to post a link to an organisation that keeps track of all of this. So if you're looking for a list, I know I answered someone in the questions with that link as well, but can be a really great resource. And at the moment, many universities are what's called test optional. I know we had a question earlier, which again I've answered in the typing, but someone asked if when a university says we are test optional, does that really mean they're test optional, or is it a benefit to submit a test? And I would just say here that if they are saying they're test optional, take them at their word. Literally, that's what they're saying. So if you have an opportunity to take the ACT or SAT and you do great in it and you feel it reflects your academic ability, amazing, add that score in, great. It won't hurt your application. However, if you've taken the ACT or SAT and it doesn't reflect your academic ability, bearing in mind this is a test designed for Americans, or you don't have that opportunity either for cost or for access or anything like that, then not submitting a score will not harm your application. And that's what universities mean when they say they are test optional. So just worth bearing in mind. And also the other question that came up was whether you could use an ACT or SAT exam in place of something like A-levels and GCSEs. Unfortunately, you cannot. So it's really important to know that universities will still be expecting, they know that we do GCSEs and A-levels or the IB or Highers or BTECs. They know that's what we do here in the UK, and they will be looking for those first and foremost. And then potentially if you want to take an ACT or SAT, it's kind of icing on the cake, but you can't use them in place of your high school grades along the way. Okay, Basha, do you have any questions you were particularly keen to answer
Yeah, someone asked if we provide support for applicants that don't fall under the Sutton program and what is the cost. So the first part is, yes, we provide support to all students from the UK that would like to study in the US, whether that's undergraduate program or postgraduate program, or if they need any help in regards to studying in the US in any capacity. And this service is completely free. We do not charge students for accessing any of the resources, whether that's our website, webinars, you know, even coming to college day or booking the one-on-one Zoom calls that Rowena mentioned. All the services that we do and that we provide are completely free for students to access, or even parents to access, if they have questions about, you know, anything that has to do with US university and studying there.
Great stuff. I just want to pick up a question. I know there were a couple of questions about activities that could go into an application to a US university. Does it have to be internships, or is, you know, what length of time? And I think what I would be saying here is each activity list, there's no like perfect list, right? It's got to reflect who you are and what you're all about. So if you love playing football, amazing. If you love collecting coins, incredible. If you did NCS and really enjoyed it, that's an amazing EC. Maybe you play music, maybe you play sport, maybe you do drama or art, maybe you run an Insta account with, like, I don't know, feminism quotes, maybe you make incredible TikToks. Whatever it is that you're doing with your time, that's what the university wants to see on the list. So that could include internships, it could include projects outside of school, it could include volunteering, it could include a part-time job, it could include family responsibilities like caring for siblings or another family member. Any of those things are your extracurriculars, and each list will be completely unique to the kind of person you specifically are. So just a real encouragement to use that activity list to shed more light on who you are and what you do. And the referees aren't really related to the activities, so just to flag that as well. Okay, great.
So we had another question.
Yeah, great.
Do you have a list of universities that offer 100% needs-based funding for international students? The simple answer is no.
But I would be encouraging everybody to head on to Big Future College Search, which I think Basha has put in the chat box. So head on there. There is literally a button to press for international students seeking financial aid, and that will get you a good old starting way to finding at that list. You can generate that list for yourself along the way. So please do go out and have a look at Big Future College Search. We're pointing at it for a really good reason. It's really helpful in that research. So again, feel free to head on to Big Future College Search, and you can use that there. Right, some other things. So someone's asking, are GCSEs looked at as much as A-levels? For example, what happens if some of your GCSEs were lower than your A-levels? I mean, US universities are going to be looking at GCSEs and A-levels, so it's not like you can be like, oh, I got like 3s on all my GCSEs and now don't worry, I'm going to get A stars all over at A-level. I mean, that's good, but it also is tricky as well, because US universities are going to look at both your GCSEs or your Nat 5s, plus also then your A-levels or BTECs or hires or whatever it is you're doing at the end of school. Now, clearly, are you the same person you were 2 years ago when you did your GCSEs? Maybe not. So that's also really important if there's context or something to explain. But these are all part of the story of your application, and they are all going to be included on your application. Okay, great. I'm just going to see if there's any other questions. There are a few questions we've got here that tend to be more specific or anything like that. So if we haven't answered a question that you'd like us to answer, I think hopefully Basha is going to pop our email address into the chat box, and so you can drop us an email and have a look at that. And then also possibly a key link to funding scholarships financially, perhaps a link to our website about that would be amazing. And then I just want to make sure we haven't got anything super helpful for everybody here. So yeah, lots of questions. Anyone asking about trips to visit US universities, I would encourage you, if you're interested in going and visiting US universities, first of all, to make sure that you're making the most of the resources available on their website, both from a cost perspective, but also an environmental planet side of things. You can get a long way on the virtual college tours and looking at the resources available on US university websites. And then once you've kind of narrowed down a list, if you are able to go and visit the United States, you can do that. Most universities in the US are very open to having prospective students come and visit the campus. There's often an admissions center where literally prospective students and their parents can go and visit. They often do daily information sessions, campus tours, all of those kind of things. So you don't need anyone to organize it for you or anything like that. You can literally go onto the university's website, that perhaps, you know, a short list kind of your universities, and have a look at visiting campus. It's normally called something like that. So you can find that there. Okie dokes, I'm going to suggest that we wrap up here. Thank you so much for your time, everybody. We've really enjoyed having you on this webinar, and so we wish you all the best for your evening. Feel free to drop us an email if you have anything else that you'd like to ask. And so from Basha and me, have a great night.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
Bye.